Escalating fuel prices and the rocketing cost of living is forcing South Africans to consider public transport as an alternative, but the country's cities rank very poorly in public transport compared to global counterparts. For more on how to address these challenges, we are joined by the University of Johannesburg Transport Management Head, Professor Jackie Walters, and the National Taxi Alliance spokesperson, Theo Malele. And we're joined by you via our poll question and also on WhatsApp tonight. We're asking you at Newzroom 405, can public transport be useful as an alternative to the rising cost of living in South Africa? You can reply yes or no to that question. We'll bring you the results a little bit later on, but you can engage with us on WhatsApp as well, 072-110-5584, and you can give us your comments and your questions. Gentlemen, good evening, and thank you very much for your time and joining us tonight here on In Focus. Dr. Malele, I'll begin with you, and we'll go to the Prof in just a moment. But I see here a professor from Stellenbosch University, Stefan Krijgsman. He puts out numbers here in the latest study that he's done. A train ticket would have cost a commuter 450 rands a month. A bus ticket would have cost a commuter 650 rands a month. Today, they have abandoned those modes of transport because trains, for example, just don't exist. On average, taxis cost commuters 800 rands a month, or private cars 1,400 rands. Are taxis the most expensive form of transportation?
Good evening to you, and good evening to the viewers out there. Well, you could say that again, primarily because our view is that government has abdicated its responsibility of ensuring that its citizens are actually being subsidized, or there is a form of support for the utilization of public transport. And I mean, we do understand as an industry that commuters were not even supposed to be paying more than 10% of their disposable income on public transport. But because of this government, commuters are almost paying over 60% of their disposable income on public transport. But we too, as a community-based business, being that of a public transport mover, we are a business, we have to show profit, but with the geopolitics at play, we are unable to can actually show that profit, because even the maintenance of our vehicles is skyrocketing, and we are unable to can even meet our monthly financial obligations to our lenders. So the situation is just unbearable.
Well, what is at the center of your cost structure?
Well, fuel is an input cost. We have tires, we have to service these vehicles. So all-inclusive, squeezes our bottom line. With a little exercise that we did just before the two previous increases, we realized that we were spending almost 6,000 rands more per petrol-propelled vehicle, and around 3,025 rands per diesel-propelled vehicle. So yes, fuel, maintenance, wear and tear, all those play a pivotal role in determining your costing structure.
Let's bring in the professor here. Professor Jackie Walters, good evening. Good to have you with us this evening as well. Talk to us about why public transport is such a major challenge in South Africa at this point.
It's been a challenge for many years. We've had, in South Africa, we have had the white paper of 1996, the specific vision statement of providing affordable, reliable, accessible public transport, safe transport, which is repeated in the 2021 white paper. But, we don't see that on the ground, despite these white papers and excellent strategy documents that the government produces together with legislation to support those strategies. The big problem that we have here is the lack of implementation of policy, and giving rise to a lack of policy certainty for operations and operators throughout the country. If you look at the bus industry, for instance, its last contracts that the government had issued was in 2002, and this industry is not allowed to expand because of a lack of funding. Even this year, a year that we have huge fuel prices, we have a 6% increase in wages of staff, and we've had a weakening exchange rate. The subsidy portion of the support that government gives this industry, because it's a formalized industry, has de-escalated. So, there's a huge funding issue around public transport apart from policy implementation. And the big problem that we have here is the lack of capacitated institutions to do planning and integration of services and planning of services. We don't have that in this country. All over the world, they have what we call transport authorities that do this work. But in South Africa, this is hugely fragmented. It's from a planning point of view, ownership point of view, a financing point of view, and you can never have an integrated public transport system, as we already stated in 1996, and encapsulated in legislation, if we cannot streamline these institutional structures to do proper planning and funding of the entire system, not only the specific modes of transport.
Yeah. And now, of course, do we have an option of doing away with the current system as it sits right now in favor of new technologies? There's things that they've tried, for example, with Rea Vaya, and some of the officials admitting that it's actually not working the way that they had envisaged it would work. In fact, the cost structure is a little bit too expensive to be able to run that kind of operation.
Well, we have seen progress, like in Gautrain, the BRT systems, maybe the taxi recap program, the rail recapitalization program, and so on. But the problem with the BRT systems is, we're spending more than 6 billion rand a year on these systems, but we're only generating 40 million passenger trips. Well, the same 6 billion in the commuter bus industry generates between 240 and 270 million passenger trips. And we know what's happened to rail. Rail is basically non-existent, although a lot of money is being poured into rail now. But if we can't solve the very important issue of safety and security in the rail system, all the investments we're now making will be worth nothing going forward. So we have to solve the security issues in rail to get rail going again. In the heydays of rail in the 1980s, they generated about 700 million passenger trips per annum.
Yeah.
Today, maybe it's 10 or 20 million passenger trips if we're lucky.
Yeah.
So rail is not there. So your question was, can the public make use of public transport in this time of high fuel prices? They can use the taxis, which is the most expensive mode of transport. Then they can use buses, but buses only have if you look at worker commuters, only has a 16% market share. So the rest of the market share is mainly, in the taxi industry, 80% of worker commuters depending on the taxi industry. And that industry has its own challenges. Right. It's a lightly regulated industry. A government has little control over that industry. It cannot really plan for the industry because it plans itself. It determines its own fare increases and so on. And it works in an open and a free market system. So our real difficulties that we face in public transport. But the blame must be laid at the door of government, not implementing its own policy objectives and strategies. Since 1996, 26 years, we've seen little progress in the mass movers in this country.
All right, Prof.
Rail and also commuter bus.
This, of course, as you put it, has called for the associations. Now I even see the Competition Commission has weighed in on this question of whether or not the state can be giving operational subsidies to minibus taxis. So, Ntate Malele, let's bring you in back into the conversation. And those who are your critics. I mean, I saw one professor of economics at the University of Cape Town saying that the taxi industry already benefits from two valuable subsidies. One, you do not abide by labor laws, and so you're paying less than the minimum wage to your employees. You can answer to that. And so it reduces your operational costs. Two, taxi associations, you are acting like de facto cartels. You fix your own prices, and therefore you can determine what your profits are. Each route you decide this is the price that you pay for this route, and everybody must abide by that. Or otherwise, if not, they are faced with violence.
Well, the prof has his own, opinion on that. But I would want to also say to the professor that he should be mindful of the fact that 40% of what is due to us as taxi operators does not end with us. It ends with, with the drivers. That's the money that we call the SOX money. That's part of the shrinkage that we face in the industry on a daily basis. It's primarily because, yes, there are poor management of collecting, revenue. Maybe we need to improve on that in order to recoup that 40%. But I do not agree with him around the fact that we are not paying, sufficient, money. Wages to the drivers. The sectoral determination, as it was introduced to the taxi industry, had a number of loopholes in it. I think we took. Let's take maybe an example of a trip from Johannesburg to KZN. I think when we did this, it's a couple of years ago. My figures may not be correct, but I know for a fact that we would not show profit as the manner in which the sectoral determination was made. But let me try and articulate on that. Let's say a fully laden taxi collects 1,000 rands to KZN. Of that 1,000 rand, the almost 300 to 400 goes to toll gates, so that you're now left with about 700 rand. You still have to put in petrol. You still have to rather replenish the petrol that you would have put in. And you also are expected to ensure that the driver gets a night-out allowance. And you also have to maybe book in for him to sleep in a motel. By the time we got to the final of that exercise, there was almost nothing left for the actual owner and the repayment of the vehicle. These are some of the issues that has actually forced even the Department of Labor to abandon the plan as it were at the time. But we've always said that they shouldn't come up, craft a plan without involving the taxi industry, so that we too can have a role in making the necessary inputs, so that they can actually have a feel of the environment within which we operate.
So if, for example, as you put those numbers, government were to say they are giving you this operational subsidy, would you be willing then to be regulated to an extent that you become a part of the municipality, and there is one fee that is paid that connects commuters to wherever, from Gatley home to be able to get to Joburg, to be able to get to Sandton, but you've got one place where you collect your fee, and that place is at a municipality, and therefore prices like buses are set there?
Look, anything that would make the taxi industry better off is more than welcome. Currently, the very municipalities that you are talking about are behaving like a referee and a player at the same time. Because when you do your application for an operating license, it is the municipalities that are requested by the provincial regulatory entity to do concurrencies. And in most cases, the municipalities would not grant those operating licenses to the taxi industry. And operating licenses are actually issued based on the routes that you operate. And now we have newcomers, the e-hailings, and which do not even have a network system that they work from, but they are issued with operating licenses. So the actual laws themselves, they will have to be realigned, and so that they are accommodative to the taxi industry as well.
So I mean, if let's leave the e-hailing for now. Let's just talk about new entries to taxi routes. You're categorically denying the fact that associations are the ones who are preventing new entries to come in, so that there could be broader competition here, and that in itself could bring down the cost of the fares.
Now, look, competitions are more than welcome because they will also make our business very competitive. But let the playing fields be leveled. For as long as the playing fields are not leveled, then we would not be able to become competitive as you would expect us to do.
Prof, I mean, does it go without saying that if we consider these operational subsidies, it could certainly represent a reform of the public transport system?
Well, if you want to level playing field, the rules must be the same as well at the end of the day. So if you look at the bus industry, it has a wage determinations, it's hours of work, it's a scheduled service, it has depots, infrastructure that has to fund itself. So the cost structure totally differs from, for instance, the taxi industry. I do agree that we have to look at more funding for public transport in South Africa. It's underfunded at this point in time. We did an exercise for the commuter bus industry, and we found that since 2009, it's been underfunded by more than 4 billion. Now, it may not sound much in terms of many other things going on in the country today, but the point in fact is that these operators can't replace their buses, and because they can't replace the buses that they should be replacing buses, they become unreliable, and high maintenance cost, and you lose customers at the end of the day. It's very much like the Eskom situation, old power stations. So this is a knock-on effect, and maybe the unintended effect of strangling the industry financially and not allowing it to grow. It hasn't been allowed to grow since 2009. That's been one of the reasons why the taxi industry has grown its market share, since 2003, quite significantly, but especially since 2009. So it calls for a big debate in South Africa, and I think the Minister of Transport should own up as far as this is concerned, and the Department of Transport and the provinces, that we should have an indaba around public transport. Where we're going, what do we need to do this? But the one thing is very clear. We have good policies, we have good strategies, but we're not implementing them. What's hindering us from implementing these policies? And unless we can find that, the hindrance, the factors that hinder the implementation, we're not going to make progress at the end of the day. In public transport, to have an integrated system. Your guest spoke about taxi licenses and the issuing of licenses. Those licenses should be issued based on the transport plan, an integrated transport plan. We don't have those plans in South Africa. So it's not based on demand for the services like you have all over the world. We determine the demand and issue the permits or issue the rights to operate based on that demand, because public transport is regulated all over the world. And in South Africa, we're failing that because we don't have integrated transport plans, because we don't have the planners to do these plans. We don't have the skills for those planners to do the work. And unless we solve these issues systemically, we will not make progress on integrated public transport plans where we have every mode functioning based on its own strengths and characteristics. In other words, the taxi industry typically short distance, urban services, buses a bit longer, and trains a bit longer as well. Right. So this is very important from a transport economics point of view, to regulate the modes adequately. And you find this throughout the world, and it works. That's why people throughout the world that are now experiencing huge fuel increases like we are experiencing are flocking to public transport. Public transport is being supported more and more. South Africa, we have a huge problem as far as that's concerned. Even if you could look at the Gauteng freeway improvement program. Years ago when this thing was introduced, there was this big debate, do we have public transport? Is it adequate to get people out of their motor cars into public transport instead of using the freeways in and around Johannesburg? Right. And the verdict is no. Nothing has changed since then.
Let's take some WhatsApp messages then to the conversation tonight. 072-110-5584. Good evening, Thabo. Rector Muchumeni in Limpopo. This government that we put in power is killing us. Why don't they give taxes subsidies in order to save us as residents of this country? Anonymous saying, hi, taxis are charging us too much, especially from Johannesburg to Newcastle. It's 3 hours, but we are paying 290 rands per trip. This is a lot. Dr. Malele, I mean, we are talking about meaningful reforms, but we are also talking about the sustainability of the operations of taxis in the country. How certain are you that if tomorrow we were to, I think they were touting an amount of about 50 billion as operational subsidies. I don't know if it will be enough. We've got 250,000 taxi drivers in this particular research that was conducted recently. I don't know what that amounts to as far as operators and whether that 50 billion rands would be able to touch size.
Look, the fact of the matter is the statistics of the taxi industry are incorrect. There's far too more than 250,000 taxis in the country. The e-notice information will give you different figures. The Department of Transport will give you different figures of the taxi industry. I think what we have been doing with the Research Council in Pretoria, we've begun to do the route mapping of the Gauteng province. Perhaps what needs to happen is to do a route mapping throughout the whole country and also quantify the number of vehicles that are in the country. But even though that research that speaks of 250,000 taxis in the country, does it also say that those taxis have operating licenses? I guess the answer would be a big no, because there are so many other vehicles on the road that do not have operating licenses by virtue of the authorities not being able to issue those operating licenses to deserving taxi operators. That also becomes a recipe for taxi violence. So there is just a lot that still needs to be corrected for the taxi industry to be a transformed industry and also to be professionalized. And if government speaks about this professionalization that is being spoken of, but it has not been unpacked to us as to what is this that the government envisages, in terms of that. But what is also at center here is the question of educating the broader taxi industry for people to can imbibe on these developments. Yeah. The history of this country has not actually surpassed us. It is still with us. Apartheid. It's still right entrenched. Yeah. It has not developed, humanity in the country. So you really do need that educational drive to try and get everybody up to speed.
Gentlemen, appreciate your time. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have this evening. We'll have to revisit this, and maybe that call for an indab or maybe a call for an educational platform of some sort is certainly something that we need to be talking about in a broader debate. Appreciate your time, and thank you very much for coming on this evening. That is University of Johannesburg Transport Management Head, Professor Jackie Walters, and here with me in the studio, National Taxi Alliance spokesperson, Theo Malele.